The cold wind screamed across the ruined battlefield, threading through shattered stone and broken bodies as if the land itself were mourning. Snow fell in relentless sheets, but no amount of white could hide the dark smear of blood soaking into the ground around Luna Fortress. The war had reached its peak, a symphony of roars, steel and death echoing between the jagged peaks. In the middle of that chaos, time seemed to fracture. An orc whose mind had been broken by dark magic stood behind Kevin, its eyes glowing a dull, murderous red. The creature's massive axe spun in its grip as it raised the weapon high, then hurled it like a guillotine at Kevin's unprotected back. For the young warrior, the world slowed to a crawl. He felt the weight of the incoming blow like a shadow settling over his spine, heavier and colder than the winter air. His exhausted muscles screamed, but refused to obey. He tried to twist, to duck, to raise his sword, anything, but his body felt submerged in tar. The blade cut through the air toward him. Before it reached its mark, another figure burst into that frozen moment. Steel crashed against steel with a shriek that tore through the battlefield. Sparks exploded in the swirling snow as Chris slid between Kevin and the incoming axe at impossible speed, his sword intercepting the killing blow. The impact rattled his arms and sent a spray of orange light across the grey sky, but the lethal trajectory was shattered. Boots buried in blood-stained snow, Chris held his ground like a wall of iron. He didn't even turn his head. "Don't let your guard down." His voice was calm, clipped, a simple reprimand in the middle of hell. For a heartbeat, only the orc's harsh breathing filled the space between them. Kevin stared at Chris's back, his life saved by the man he'd sworn to compete with. What should have been gratitude twisted into something darker. Shame burned through his chest, hotter than any wound. The realization that he would have died if not for Chris sliced deeper than any blade. That shame ignited. Red aura exploded around Kevin's body, flaring into a violent storm that turned falling snow into steam before it could reach his skin. Rage, humiliation, and raw frustration swirled into a crimson halo. Without answering, without acknowledging the rescue, he launched himself forward. The world blurred as he lunged at the orc, his movement fueled not by discipline, but by the desperate need to prove he was not a burden. Kevin's sword carved across the orc's chest with brutal force. The creature howled, a guttural roar ripped from its lungs as its thick hide split open. Blood poured over its torso, but Kevin was far from finished. He was no longer thinking. He was a vessel for the rage that consumed him. He leapt into the air, armor and all, his eyes blazing with a divine, almost judgmental light. At the peak of his jump, he brought his sword down with both hands, channeling every ounce of rage into the strike. The blade split the monster before it could even fall to its knees. Kevin landed hard in the snow, breath ragged, aura slowly dimming as the surge of power faded. His hands trembled from the intensity of the release. He turned toward Chris, pride and defensiveness warring across his face. "Even if you hadn't helped," he said, forcing the lie through clenched teeth. "I could have avoided that attack." They both knew it wasn't true. Kevin had felt death closing in. If Chris hadn't intervened, he would already be lying in the snow with a broken spine. But his voice was steady, stubbornly clinging to the illusion of control. Chris didn't argue. He watched the younger warrior with eyes that held neither mockery nor pity, only understanding. A faint smile tugged at his lips, the expression of a veteran who recognized the fire of a rival struggling to grow. "In that case," Chris replied lightly, "let's make it interesting. How about a bet and whoever kills more orcs wins?" Oh, it wasn't just competition. It was guidance. Instead of scolding Kevin for his recklessness, Chris redirected his frustration toward the one thing that mattered, annihilating the enemy. Kevin clicked his tongue, jaw tight. "You don't need to tell me twice." Their unspoken agreement was sealed not with words, but with the blood already soaking the snow. While their rivalry flared, the true reaper of the battlefield continued his work. Roman Dmitri moved among the orcs like a shadow carved from the storm itself. There was no wasted motion, no shouting, no theatrics. Where others stomped and slipped on frozen ground, Roman seemed to glide, his steps so light that the snow barely recorded his passing. His sword rose and fell with mechanical simplicity, one motion, one corpse. Orcs who towered over ordinary men were reduced to stumbling fools in front of him, their power meaningless against his perfect form. Each strike was precise enough to be called surgical. He didn't hack or thrash. He cut. Throats, hearts, joints. Every blow landed exactly where it needed to be. The battlefield around him was a carving, and Roman was the sculptor, calmly removing everything that did not belong. Seeing their lord's relentless advance, Kevin and Chris fell silent. Whatever petty emotions churned inside them faded away as they watched the standard they aspired to reach. Compared to that man, their rivalry was small. High above, on the battered fortress walls, the Orc commander watched the tide shift. Krat, general of the Orc forces, surveyed the carnage with growing horror. His yellow eyes locked again and again on Roman's figure, that relentless violet light cutting his army apart. Logic insisted the human should have long since exhausted his strength. No warrior, human or otherwise, could maintain that level of mana and physical output for so long. Yet Roman kept moving, kept killing, his pace unbroken. Every time the Orcs threw another wave at him, the result was the same. Bodies fell, and Roman stepped forward through the gap. The distance between Roman and the wall grew smaller with terrifying inevitability. Fear coiled in Krat's gut, cold and suffocating. The limit he'd been waiting for, the moment Roman would slow, stagger or collapse, refused to appear. Desperation gnawed at his sanity. He snarled at the shaman at his side. Use a stronger spell. The shaman began to chant, weaving a new ritual, but it was already too late. From below, a focused blast of mana and compressed air roared upward. Krat barely managed to throw himself aside as the invisible strike tore past, close enough that he felt it brush his cheek. The castle wall behind him didn't just crack, it disintegrated in a straight line, stone shredding like brittle parchment. Dust billowed. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Roman and Krat locked eyes across the distance, the human lord standing amidst a mountain of corpses, the Orc commander poised atop the wall. In that single exchange of glances, whatever remained of Krat's courage shattered. He saw no fatigue in Roman's gaze, no hesitation, only cold intent, pride shriveled, replaced by animal survival instinct. Krat turned and fled. He ran along the ramparts, boots pounding against stone, leaving his army to die behind him. To him, the fortress was already gone. The only thing left to save was his own life. While chaos devoured the walls, a different struggle unfolded in the fortress's dark veins. 27 of Dmitri's elite soldiers, who had entered through the secret tunnel, had successfully forced their way into the heart of the stronghold. Moving like phantoms in the damp, torch-lit corridors, they cut down guards and opened cells with unyielding efficiency. Chains broke, locks shattered, and one by one the prisoners realized what was happening. They were being saved. Tears flowed freely as families clung to each other, the crushing weight of hopelessness lifting at last. Cries of gratitude filled the air, people called Caden's name, blessing Dmitri and its mysterious lord. To them, these 27 warriors were not mere soldiers. They were avenging spirits, sent to drag them back from the edge of hell. But their leader did not allow emotion to cloud his judgment. The Dmitri captain in charge of the group kept his voice level as he issued orders. First squad, keep searching. There may be more prisoners in the lower cells. We don't leave anyone behind. The first group moved without hesitation, peeling away into deeper darkness. Second squad, gather everyone we've freed. We move to the main gate. Protect them at all costs. Caden stood among the rescued crowd, watching the Dmitri soldiers with something close to awe. Their discipline did not waver, even as sobbing civilians clutched at them. With only 30 men, Roman had turned a hopeless massacre into a winnable war. Caden realized he was witnessing something that future generations would call legend. An orc lunged from the shadows. Hiding behind a stack of crates, one of the surviving beasts hurled itself at Caden with a desperate roar, dagger aimed for his back. This time, Caden did not freeze. The man who had once been eaten alive by despair had been reforged on this battlefield. His sword flashed. In a single motion, Caden twisted, drew, and swung. The orc's head flew from its shoulders, thudding onto the stone a moment before the body collapsed. The attack ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving only silence and the copper scent of fresh blood. He didn't waste the moment. "Everyone, move," Caden shouted, his voice firm and commanding. "Follow Dmitri's soldiers." The civilians obeyed without question, fear giving way to desperate trust. The corridors filled with the sound of hurried footsteps as the rescued made their way toward the light. Outside, the heart of the battlefield transformed into a vision from a nightmare. Before the ruined main gate, corpses had piled so high they formed a grotesque barrier. Orc bodies and human remains lay tangled in a mound that reached almost to the splintered walls. The snow beneath had turned from white to a thick crimson slush. Every step squelched with the sound of soaked leather and crushed flesh. It was less a field of battle and more a lake of blood. Near that grisly wall, Chris and Kevin leaned against the fortress stones, chests heaving with exhaustion. Their armor bore the history of the battle, dents, scratches, and streaks of dried gore. Their swords were nicked and stained, hanging loosely in their tired grips. Chris glanced sideways at Kevin, studying the younger warrior's battered form. Despite himself, he felt a grudging respect settle in his chest. The kid had pushed far beyond what many seasoned soldiers could endure. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought crossed his mind clearly. Not bad. Kevin stared at the ground, fingers twitching around his hilt. Sweat and melted snow dripped from his hair, mixing with the blood on his face. He knew he'd fought well, better than he ever had, but he also knew he'd still fallen short of Chris. The frustration was suffocating. Every ragged breath carried the bitter taste of inadequacy. Yet there was one thing they could agree on. As they lifted their eyes and looked past the sea of bodies to where Roman still stood, sword in hand, their rivalry shrank into insignificance. Roman was still moving, still cutting down any orc foolish enough to remain standing. While they leaned on the wall, he alone stood upright, a solitary pillar of power amid the carnage. Compared to their lord, both Chris and Kevin were still standing at the bottom of a mountain they hadn't even begun to climb. Their moment of reflection ended when a soldier hurried over to Roman, face tight. "Lord Dmitri, there is a problem." Roman turned his head slightly, attention shifting. His posture, his breathing, nothing about him showed the fatigue that weighed on his men. "Speak." "The Orc commander," the soldier reported. "Krat. He has barricaded himself inside a building, and he's taken prisoners as hostages." Roman's eyes narrowed as the memory resurfaced. The coward who'd fled from the wall. "Take me to him." They arrived at a structure near the inner courtyard, its entrance blocked by nervous guards and terrified survivors. In front of the sealed door stood Krat, his back pressed against the wood, one thick arm wrapped around a trembling girl. In his other hand, he clutched a crude, magical detonator, faint light pulsing at its core. His voice cracked with both fear and bluster. "If you don't accept my terms, I'll blow this place apart. The bomb will kill every prisoner inside." He lifted the device higher for all to see, digging his claws into the girl's shoulders as she whimpered. "You have 10 minutes. Guarantee my safe escape, or they all die." In his mind, Krat still believed he held the advantage. Humans, he thought, were weak. Soft creatures shackled by their attachment to each other. They couldn't bear the thought of sacrificing innocent lives. That sentimentality would be his shield. Roman stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively as he moved, his steps quiet, unhurried. He stopped a short distance away, eyes cool as they settled on the Orc commander. "So," Roman said, voice devoid of any visible emotion, "you wish to negotiate with me." For a flicker of a moment, Krat felt hope, but then he saw it. The faint curve at the corner of Roman's mouth, not fear, not urgency, curiosity. Roman tilted his head slightly. "Do you know why I didn't kill you earlier?" The question hit Krat like a slap. This wasn't how negotiations were supposed to begin. "What nonsense are you babbling?" he snarled, tightening his grip on the hostage. The glow of the detonator pulsed faster as his thumb hovered over the trigger. "I'll kill them. I swear I will," Roman continued, as if he hadn't heard the threat. His gaze didn't waver. "You abandoned your own warriors and ran. You discarded your men to save yourself. That is the kind of commander you are, without honor, without worth." His voice carried clearly to every ear in the courtyard, soldiers and civilians alike. "You are not feared. You are despised." Rage twisted Krat's features. "You think your foolish words matter. I keep talking and I'll—" His thumb began to press the trigger. In the next instant, the detonator clattered to the ground. Krat blinked, stunned. His hand felt suddenly light. He looked down and saw blood. His wrist ended in a ragged stump. His severed hand, still loosely clutching the detonator, lay on the stone at Roman's feet. Roman stood where he had been, sword drawn, blade wet with fresh blood. "I told you," he said coldly, "you have no value whatsoever." No one had seen him move. Not the prisoners, not the soldiers, not even the orc whose hand had been removed. One moment Krat had leverage, the next he had nothing but pain and terror. Roman's lips curved into a smile colder than the snow around them. "But now, you've gained a little worth." He grabbed what remained of Krat and dragged him across the ground like a discarded sack. The orc's once imposing frame scraped across stone, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Roman hauled him into the open square where the rescued civilians and exhausted soldiers had gathered. There, he threw Krat down before them. "This," Roman announced, his voice ringing clear, "is the last surviving orc commander. I intend to execute him." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many stepped back instinctively at the sight of the monster who had orchestrated their suffering. But Roman did not raise his sword. Instead, he held the hilt out, not toward the orc, but toward the people. "His life belongs to you," he said. "You, who lived through his cruelty. You, who lost everything under his command. Take this blade. His blood is yours to spill." Fear gripped the civilians. The trauma of captivity still clung to them like chains. Even now, standing in the open, many felt like prisoners. Krat tried to weaponize that fear one last time, cackling through the pain. He whispered threats, promised revenge, tried to turn their memories against them. They flinched. They hesitated. Then a small hand rose. A boy stepped forward from the crowd, thin, clothes torn, eyes sunken from hunger and sleepless nights. He looked barely strong enough to lift a sword, but his voice didn't waver when he spoke. "I'll do it." Roman watched him silently as the boy approached and gripped the offered hilt. The sword rasped out of its scabbard with a lonely, echoing sound. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, blurring his vision, but he didn't stop walking. He stood over Krat's broken body. "My name is Smith," he said softly, voice shaking. "My friend, he was kind. He couldn't even kill an ant." His fingers tightened around the sword. You skinned him, and you ate him, in front of me." The words tore through the crowd, faces twisted with horror, grief and fury. Smith's shoulders shook as sobs tried to break his voice, but he pushed the blade forward. "Why?" "Oh," he choked out. "Why did you do that?" He didn't wait for an answer that would never come. Smith's sword plunged into Krat's flesh, once, twice, again and again, each thrust fueled not by skill, but by raw, annihilating grief. He stabbed wildly, screaming, sobbing, demanding answers that the dying orc could no longer provide. Every movement was a desperate attempt to carve his pain out of reality. Watching him, something in the crowd snapped. A mother stepped forward, her eyes hollow, her hands shaking, as she remembered the child she'd never see again. A man whose home had burned to the ground pushed through, expression twisted with rage. A sister who had lost her brother grabbed whatever weapon she could and joined them. They surged as one. What followed was no clean execution. It was a storm of vengeance. Blades, fists, and boots fell upon Krat's body until it ceased to resemble a living creature at all. The people who had been victims became executioners, pouring years of terror and helplessness into every strike. They tore the last Orc commander apart until nothing recognizable remained. Caden watched, stomach churning. He'd seen battlefields drenched in blood, had walked among severed limbs and shattered armor. But this was different. This was not soldiers killing enemies. This was a people tearing apart the last piece of their nightmare with their bare hands. He stepped toward Roman, unable to stand still any longer. "Isn't this enough?" So he asked quietly. "He's already dead." The crowd continued to strike what was left of Krat, their faces contorted by a mixture of fury and relief. Smith's small body shook as he kept swinging, long after there was nothing left to cut. Caden swallowed hard. "I don't care about the Orc," he admitted. "But if this continues, that boy, he'll lose himself. He'll fall too far. How is he supposed to live with this?" Roman turned his gaze on Caden, eyes ancient and unreadable. "Does this sight seem cruel to you?" he asked. Caden hesitated. "It's not cruelty toward the Orc I worry about," he said. "It's what this will do to them, to Smith, to their hearts." Roman looked away from the ravaged corpse and out over the ruined fortress, the collapsed walls, the burned buildings, the stained snow. His cloak stirred in the cold wind as he spoke, voice low but absolute. "You're mistaken." He spoke like someone who had seen civilizations rise in splendor and die in fire. "The peaceful Arcadia you remember no longer exists. This world has become one of steel and blood. People are carrying wounds that will never heal. The only way forward is to trample the enemies who gave them those scars." Caden listened, jaw tight. "For Luna to move on," Roman continued, "they cannot simply forget. They must crush what tormented them. Otherwise their fear will rule them for the rest of their lives. This is war, and we are not done." He looked to the horizon beyond the fortress walls, where other battles surely raged unseen. "What happened here is happening elsewhere," Roman said. "In distant lands, the strong are devouring the weak. If you truly want peace, then you cannot show mercy to those who would see you broken. Mercy for monsters is cruelty toward the people you're trying to protect." His words echoed off the battered stone, sinking into every heart that heard them. "That," Roman concluded, "is the path of Dmitri. If you choose to stand with us, it is the path you must walk from now on."